From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Tennessee legislature expels two lawmakers who disrupted its proceedings, which Democrats nationally are casting as another Republican attack on democracy. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Berua. According to a Reuters report last week, only two Tennessee state representatives had been expelled by the chamber since the Civil War era, one in 1980 for soliciting a bribe and another in 2016 after being accused of sexual misconduct. But now that number has risen to four after two expulsions last week of Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson for disrupting the chamber a couple of weeks ago during protests calling for gun control after the recent horrible mass shooting at a elementary school in Nashville. Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson took a bullhorn to the floor of the House and seized control of the chamber. It was quickly gavelled into recess, and they stood there demanding action, chanting with the crowd in the gallery, "Gun control now, no action, no peace." Let's listen to a piece of their protest.
To the media, there comes a time when we have to do something out of the ordinary. That's why we're standing in the well today, occupying the well, because our colleagues refuse to listen to the people of Tennessee. When you left us with no other choice, we asked you, what will we do? You ignored the calls of the people today. We don't want to be up here, but we have no choice but to find a way to get in the way and disrupt business as normal, because business as normal is our children dying. That's right. Business as normal is the proliferation of military weapons in our communities. That's right. And so will we do something today, colleagues? The choice is yours. The choice is yours. The people are asking us. That's right. I heard a great chant out there. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people.
This is the statement from President Biden last week. He said that Republican lawmakers had expelled Democratic legislators who stood in solidarity with students and families and helped lift their voices. Today's expulsion of lawmakers who engaged in peaceful protest is shocking, undemocratic, and without precedent. Rather than debating the merits of the issue, these Republican lawmakers have chosen to punish, silence, and expel duly elected representatives of the people of Tennessee. And Kim, I wonder what you make of this controversy, and particularly the idea that this is an undemocratic move by the Tennessee legislature. I mean, I find myself wondering who is being undemocratic. Is it the duly elected legislators voting to expel their colleagues who are disruptive, or is it the guys with the bullhorn that are stopping the daily business of the people's house?
Right. The claim by Vice President Kamala Harris and others that this is an affront to democracy, in my mind, turns it on its head. What was actually happening on the floor of the legislature there in terms of the business of the legislature is what we call the democratic process. Democracy. The people who came in with the bullhorns were disrupting that democratic process. It kind of reminds me of people who confuse this issue when they say that folks that are engaged in shouting down speakers on campuses are somehow engaging in free speech. And I think the thing that makes it even a little more risible, some of these comments, in particular the White House, as you heard that statement saying they were engaged in peaceful protest. This country does believe in peaceful protest, but it's the tool that we commonly view as something that the public uses when they want to send a message to legislators. Legislators, those who are duly elected, are the ones that we expect to then go to the floor, engage in the democratic process. If you don't have the votes to get across the legislation that you want, it's your job to then negotiate, put pressure on the other side, figure out some way to come to a resolution, not grab your bullhorn and go down and complain and disrupt official proceedings. Now, all that being said, I think the decision to expel these two members was probably unnecessary. Expulsion should be used in very rare and very extreme circumstances. There were other tools available to send a message that this was inappropriate, censor, for instance, or suspension from committee assignments. I think that, unfortunately, this elevated it to a new level that it probably didn't need to be elevated to. But let's just be clear that the original affront here were those who decided to disrupt what was a democratic process.
To Kim's point about protests generally being something that you imagine the public doing toward the elected representatives, it does strike me that I think both of these state representatives are in their 20s. And so this is a new young cohort of state legislators that want to mix things up, and they have maybe activist backgrounds and are bringing some of those tactics from outside the legislative chamber into the legislative chamber. But Monet, I mean, doesn't the State House, the Speaker of the House, have a interest in deterring that kind of behavior? Otherwise, whoever controls the well of the House with the loudest bullhorn is the one whose message gets across. And it does seem to me that there's a reason that legislative bodies have very odd sometimes rules of decorum. And that's because they're often debating fundamental issues, fundamental values. Things can get heated there. And if you ever watch C-SPAN, you see Congress in action. You see people addressing their colleagues as things like, my friend, the honorable gentleman from South Carolina, I disagree with what he said. And there's a reason for those sort of formalities, even if they're awkward at times and even if they're kind of funny, watching people on a polar opposite sides of an issue sort of with gritted teeth be nice to one another. But Monet, there's a reason and a history that those kinds of rules are what keep these bodies functioning and not breaking down into partisan bickering.
I agree completely with you and Kim in the sense that we have a culture of democracy in this country that encourages free speech and even protest in the public when people happen to be very animated about a particular cause. In this case, it was the aftermath of the shooting at a school in Nashville and a lot of progressives calling for gun control and frustrated that the Republican majority was unwilling to consider serious curbs on gun ownership in that state in the aftermath of that shooting. But the process should be one wherein the public can act in a very animated way, can take to the streets and express their opinions, and the representatives then have to take up that cause in a dignified and orderly way and see if they can come to some consensus about getting something done, or perhaps the will isn't there within either the broader public or within the legislature to act on whatever the issue being addressed in the protest is. And so these legislators, as you said, being very young and probably coming from a progressive activist background, we're introducing a way of behaving in the legislature which is not native to it, and frankly, which would throw sand in the gears of it being able to be a productive institution altogether. I do think that the relative youth and inexperience of the representatives is also important in why they might have been expelled compared with a third, Gloria Johnson, another Democratic representative who also protested and very famously, prominently at this point was not expelled. The two who were expelled are black and are younger. Gloria Johnson is white and a little bit older. But I think it's also important to point out that she had been in the House of Representatives since 2019, whereas Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, who were expelled, had only been in the legislature for a couple of months, since this past January. And so people pointed to race when they were asking why was it that Gloria Johnson wasn't expelled when the other two were. And I do think that there are differences in how they behave on the floor, but I also think it might be important that she has been there for longer and she happens to know more of her colleagues in the legislature. It's possible that many Republicans thought, I know Gloria, I know that she doesn't mean harm, and we're not going to expel her because we know she's a reasonable person, whereas the others didn't have that track record. And so there are lots of ways that the differences in the background and the behavior of these legislators contributed to different outcomes in terms of the expulsion votes.
Representative Gloria Johnson is one of the people who was pointing to race and making an argument that that made a difference in the outcomes here. She was asked why she thought she was not also expelled, and she said it, quote, may have to do with the color of our skin, unquote. And let's listen to a clip of Tennessee Speaker of the House Cameron Sexton responding to that claim on Fox News.
Well, I mean, that's a false narrative. She had two attorneys in the well. And if you go back and look at the opening, her attorney, John Mark Wendell, came out strong, made a lot of points that she was not as active a participant as the other two. She didn't grab the bullhorn. She didn't scream and yell.
Kim, what do you make of that? I mean, I watched the video that was shown of their protest before the expulsion vote, and it does seem to show Gloria Johnson kind of standing in solidarity with her two younger colleagues, but she doesn't, at least in any of the video that I saw, she doesn't take the bullhorn, and at times she's almost separated from. She's standing kind of near the well of the House, but not right next to them, not cheering them on. She's just kind of there in solidarity.
Yeah, I watched the video too, and that's very, very clear. There were two ringleaders here, and those were the two who ultimately faced expulsion. And, now people are saying racism, racism. The reality is that you could watch that video. It was pretty clear who was causing the problem. The fact that they happen to be African American in no way should shelter them from some sort of consequence for the behavior that they engaged in. And you simply can't make a persuasive case that they were singled out and others were given a pass when in fact the behavior that you saw going on down on the floor was very different in terms of Gloria Johnson and them.